Hey everybody, it's me, Harley. I chose to do my speech on a woman named Shirley Chisholm. I chose her because I really thought that the type of change that she was trying to bring and the fact that she was willing to be an advocate for so many different changes because no one had the courage to do it back then, especially being a woman. She, embodied that courage, and that's why I chose her for this. So I wanted to start with a quote from Shirley. She said, "I want to be remembered as a woman who dared to be a catalyst of change." And needless to say, Shirley was most definitely a catalyst of change. So I'm going to share a little bit of her background with y'all before I get into her most recognized accomplishments. So she was from Brooklyn, New York. She grew up with a family whose dad worked in a factory. She was no different than you or I, per se. She came from a working middle class family, and she worked her way up. And then she eventually received a master's degree at Columbia University in early childhood education, which I think is wonderful because in order to implement change, it is probably a good thing to start with kids that are younger because they're going to be the next generation. And she was clearly a great teacher because, once I get into it, her role throughout her political career, she made plenty of changes and taught people different things. So she was a nursery school teacher. It's much different than talking to you or I, but she did it, and she did it flawlessly. And after she did the nursery school teaching, she also became an author, and that is also hard to do because an author has to embody patience in order to write the book and publish it the way that it needs to be to get it perfect for people to read. And the name of her book was Unbossed and Untaught, and that was also a personal motto for her, and I just thought that that was a wonderful title because she's basically implying that, she has no boss. She is her own boss, and she was untaught. It's just natural. She's got the ability to implement change and the courage to do it, and it just comes naturally to her, which is, not a lot of people have that. So even though those are just a few minor accomplishments that she had growing up throughout her life, now I want to share with you some of her major accomplishments that are the most recognized around the world. So the one that I think that is the coolest, honestly, is that she was the first African American woman to be sworn into Congress in 1968, and that was just, for one, being a woman was unheard of, and for two, being a black woman, to be able to do that, is insane to think about back then. Now it's more recognized, and it's easier for black women to have that, confidence and ability to be able to get into office, but for her, she had to work really hard for that, and I just think that it's wonderful that she actually succeeded in it because then she was able to become a role model for women and black women all around the world. But during her time in Congress, she wanted to focus on implementing change in different areas, one being the civil rights movement. She worked a lot with women's rights movements, and then she worked a lot with something that I find very interesting is the poor people's movements because it was not focused on a lot during her time in Congress. And she was a black feminist who was also trying to work with the white feminists because the white feminists were just writing her off, pushing her off, and they weren't giving her the time of day because they didn't understand her side and where she was coming from because they didn't want to understand. At that time, it was unheard of for that. So she was trying to unite those two sisterhoods, and that takes a lot of bravery to do that because it's crossing boundaries that people hadn't stepped over before. But during all of this and her trying to find or make change in Congress, she also set out for the Democratic Party nomination in 1972 for the presidential election, which you go, girl. I think that's awesome. Though she did not win, she did have an accomplishment during her campaign where she received 10% of the delegate votes, which gave her 152 votes total. And in my opinion, 152 votes is wonderful compared to having 0 votes if you didn't try. So, I applaud Shirley for being able to stand up. Excuse my dog. I'm so sorry. Applaud Shirley for being able to stand up and make that change happen. So the next thing I want to talk about is just the fact that in general, Shirley really fought to bring change from in social justice, from the streets to the halls of the national government. I mean, everything that she did with desire, passion, ambition, and she tried really hard to make sure that people had what they needed and that the voices of the people were heard, especially that of women, because women were overlooked a lot during this time period. Um, Her decision to work within politics on Capitol Hill set her apart in the realm of Black feminism, all over the world, because it was just unheard of, and she was wanting to make it heard, and that was just, one of her biggest accomplishments, in my opinion, was that she was changing the way that things were looked at and the way that things were, and that takes a lot of courage to do. So Shirley accomplished a lot in her life, and that any women, especially Black women, should be proud of, because after 15 years of Congress, she did leave her position in 1983, and then she began to go back to teaching. So I think that that's really cool, because she was able to start with teaching, and then she made her change and had her voice heard, and then allowed for other voices to be heard, and then she went back to teaching until she passed away in 2005. So I think that her decision to go back to teaching really also says a lot about her character, because she didn't want to just leave Congress. She wanted to be able to keep putting forth her voice and showing people that you can be the change in the world, and that is just a miracle. There's not a lot of people out there that do that. So to give a brief summary, Shirley basically was the motivation in Congress for Black women, and the motivation in the world for women everywhere to be able to put their voice out there and to understand that, it doesn't matter where you come from or what you want to change. As long as you're willing to put your voice out there, it will be known. And I think that she became a wonderful role model during her time in Congress, trying to, put change in the women's rights movements and the civil rights movements and poor people's movements, because not a lot of people in those movements had, an advocate for them because they were too scared to speak up, and Shirley did that. But the ambition and the drive and the passion that Shirley embodied throughout her journey allowed her to bring change to politics. She made it possible for Black women to feel confident in their abilities, and provided a strong role model for them and women everywhere, in order to keep pushing forward and to know that they can do better. But her time on Earth and in Congress will forever be remembered, recognized, and used as motivation to bring change across the world. Like I said, be the change you wish to see in the world. And I thank you, Shirley, for doing that. Thank y'all.